Before the guillotine was made, an executioner might try several times with a sword before they got it right and cut off someone's head. The whole thing was very gross, bloody, and painful. Dr. Joseph Guillotine wanted to find a more humane way to kill people when he made a machine that would quickly cut off the heads of people who were put to death. Anyone who was thought to be against the revolution's ideas would be put to death by the guillotine. Because it was used so often, Joseph Guillotine had no idea that his razor would become known as the national razor of France. It can be hard to understand the French Revolution because of all the different political groups that formed and the ideas that changed over time. Also talked about was how Maximilien Robespierre, who seemed to be above corruption and fought for the poor, ran a dictatorship that started the reign of terror. A lot of people who supported the revolution early on were put to death at the guillotine. This included thinkers whose ideas helped start the revolution in the first place. Many of them died to show their support for the French Republic and the people, and to speak out against Robespierre's terror of the people. In fact, seeing the bodies of those who died at the guillotine might help you understand how complicated and difficult the French Revolution was. Marie Antoinette. Marie Antoinette, who was married to King Louis XVI, came to stand for the bad things that the French government did. People knew her for her fancy tastes and fancy parties, even though people in France were starving and living in the streets. The popular phrase, "let them eat cake," sums up this way of thinking. But there is no proof that Marie Antoinette said that. She was known to care a lot about the poor people in France. The rebellion against the monarchy began on July 14, 1789, which is now known as Bastille Day. A large group of people broke into the Bastille jail and stole weapons and ammunition that they would use in their fight. On October the 6th that year, they went into Versailles. The royal family was then taken to Paris, where they were pretty much locked up at home. The French Republic was finally created in 1792, and the monarchy was thrown out. In 1793, the next year, Marie Antoinette was put on trial for treason and other crimes, such as adding to the French national debt with her lavish spending. The judge found her guilty, and she spent her last days in a horrible jail that was too fancy for the Queen. On October the 16th, 1793, 4 years after being taken to Paris, she was put to death at the guillotine. King Louis XVI, it was based on the idea of the divine right of kings, which basically means that God chose the king and that the king is above the law. The French monarchy ended with King Louis XVI. He didn't have to be smart to be king, and sadly, King Louis XVI is remembered for being bad at politics, which may have led to the French Revolution. King Louis sent French men to fight for the American colonies in the American Revolution. This was a way for France to pay for a proxy war with England, which had been France's main enemy in the past. Unfortunately, this caused the national debt to get out of hand, and he wouldn't raise taxes to pay for it. The country was having money problems, so in May 1789, he called together the Estates General, which was made up of both nobles and commoners, to try to solve the issues the country was having. The members of the meeting agreed to write a new constitution that would limit the king's powers because he was divinely established. This was bad for the king. The king couldn't stop the movement because he was always unable to make up his mind and deal with disagreements. At Paris, the new National Assembly found him guilty of treason and sent him to prison with his wife and children. On January 21st, 1793, the king was put to death by the guillotine. Maximilien Robespierre. Maximilien Robespierre was a registered lawyer who pushed for changes in the government. A lot of what he thought was affected by Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who believed in the idea of a perfect man who lived only by his conscience and not by rules set by other people. This made him care about the poorest people, which is how he got the name the Incorruptible. Robespierre was a member of the Estates General, which wrote a new constitution. He also helped write the Declaration of the Rights of Man, which was one of the most important ideas of the revolution. He made the case for killing the king and was chosen to be on the group that would make a new government for France. Maybe this is when his political goals came true and the infallible showed that he could make mistakes. Robespierre then planned the Reign of Terror, a time of fear and chaos during which anyone thought to be against the change was jailed. 17,000 people were put to death by guillotine, and up to 300,000 rebels were arrested. During this time, Robespierre pretty much got rid of all of his political opponents. He was jailed because the killings he called for made a lot of people unhappy with the now radical dictator. Robespierre tried to kill himself but failed, and he was later caught. He was put to death on the same guillotine that had put so many others to death. Jacques-Pierre Brissot. Before the French Revolution, Jacques-Pierre Brissot had studied law and writing. Like Robespierre, he was greatly affected by the moral ideas that Jean-Jacques Rousseau pushed. He was even locked up in the Bastille for a short time, because his support for changing the way prisons worked was seen as a threat to the king and queen. After he was freed, he joined the fight against slavery and, along with the American political thinker Thomas Paine, pushed for a republican form of government that would let the will of the people be carried out. He even went to America while it was still building its government. These trips definitely changed his political views. As the French Revolution began, Brissot was chosen to the National Convention and made leader of the Girondins, a group that Robespierre looked down upon. When the king was found guilty of treason, Brissot said that he shouldn't be killed so that France could keep him as a trading chip in talks with other countries. He also thought that the people should be able to decide what would happen to the king. During the Reign of Terror, Robespierre said that Brissot was doing things that were against the revolution, such as his support for putting the king to death. He was also thought to be a spy. Brissot was put to death at the guillotine, along with many other people that Robespierre saw as threats. Georges Danton. Before the French Revolution, Georges Danton worked as a lawyer. He came from a well-known but not very rich family. He was in charge of the Cordeliers Club, a group of people who wanted France to be ruled by the people and thought that the monarchy could not back ideas of freedom for the people. He was accused of planning the September massacres, in which more than 1,000 prisoners were killed during France's war with Austria. This was a major factor in his later death. He was chosen to the National Convention when it met in 1792 despite the accusations. He then became a member of the Committee of Public Safety, which during the Reign of Terror was France's government. He also helped set up the Revolutionary Tribunal, which tried people who were accused of being political rebels during the revolution. The people were also disarmed, so they couldn't rise up against the new dictatorship. However, he changed his tone and spoke out against the government's use of fear as a normal measure. He also pushed for better diplomacy between countries so that Europe would accept France's new government. The views of Danton did not agree with Robespierre at all, and he started looking for ways to charge Danton with activities that were against the revolution. People said he took bribes from other countries and used the movement to make money for himself. In 1794, Madame Guillotine put an end to his life. Princess Elizabeth. This princess was King Louis XVI's sister. He became king when she was only a year old, and she stayed close to him and the rest of her family during his rule. She never got married, maybe because she was close to her brother and didn't want to get married and start a new relationship with someone from another country, which would mean being away from her family. People knew her to be very pious, and she supported the monarchy strongly. This may have been because of the divine right of kings, which connects religion and the monarchy. The house at Versailles was broken into, and she, her brother, and the rest of the royal family were taken to Paris. While her family was under house arrest, she may have been quietly negotiating with groups that supported the monarchy to get out of jail. Even though her tries failed, she stayed with Marie Antoinette and her children. Even though she wasn't seen as a threat, Robespierre arrested her and brought her before the Revolutionary Tribunal in 1794. Since the king and queen had already been put to death, her fate was already set. She helped the royal family try to flee and was charged with treason. She was put to death at the guillotine. Charlotte Corday. At the library in the abbey where Charlotte Corday grew up in Caen, France, she could read books by Plutarch, Rousseau, and Voltaire. As the Reign of Terror spread, the revolution became more extreme, and she became a supporter of the Girondin movement. Robespierre looked down upon this movement because it took a reasonable view on how the revolution should go. Robespierre wanted the execution killings to get worse, but the Girondins wanted a more democratic and republican government to take over France. Robespierre was a member of the radical Jacobin movement. Jean-Paul Marat was a writer who was one of the movement's most well-known leaders. People thought he had something to do with the September massacres, and Corday believed that his ideas, which were printed in a national newspaper, were getting France ready for a civil war that would destroy the country. She went to Paris, where Marat lived, and bought a 6-inch knife. While he was bathing, she stabbed him. For killing a friend of the people, Corday was caught and put on trial. She was put to death at the guillotine after being found guilty of killing Marat. Not long before she died, she asked that a picture of herself be made so that people would remember her as she really was. Olympe de Gouges. At the start of the 1780s, Olympe de Gouges became well known as a social campaigner. She spoke out against the slave trade in the French colonies and the patriarchal system that kept women from having rights. She wrote an angry paper in 1791 called Declaration of the Rights of Woman and the Female Citizen. It came out just before the French Republic was officially formed. According to de Gouges, everyone was born equal, no matter their race or gender, and should have the same rights instead of being slaves or ruled by patriarchy. This is why he supported the revolution. She lost interest in the change, though, when she learned that women would not be given the same rights as men. She was also against all kinds of violence, including the death penalty, which is why she fought against putting the king to death. As the reign of terror went on and the change became more extreme, de Gouges' writings got stronger in their calls for law and order to be restored instead of the violence that was already going on. She was arrested for being against the revolution and for supporting the Girondin movement. She was not given a lawyer because the National Convention thought she was smart enough to handle her own case. She was put to death at the guillotine for trying to bring back the throne. Madame Roland. As you can probably see by now, the French Revolution started out as a way to get rid of the government and put the people in charge of France. However, it quickly turned into a bloodbath meant to wipe out anyone who stood up to Maximilien Robespierre. This idea is best shown by the story of Madame Roland, who supported the revolution but finally gave in to it and died at the guillotine. Roland was very holy because he went to a convent for school. Reading a lot of Voltaire, Rousseau, Montesquieu and Plutarch helped her understand the ideas that led to the revolution. As an adult, Madame Roland backed her husband's political work and goals, which helped start the change. She was known for being very good at making friends and having a lot of them. Because of this, an offer to an event by Madame Roland was seen as important by the new Republican government, because she and her husband helped Jacques-Pierre Brissot start the Girondin movement. She was against Robespierre. As the accusations against her grew, she and many other Girondins were jailed for treason. She wrote her autobiography and thought about the role of women in French society while she was in jail. She was able to help her husband get out of Paris, but she was killed herself. Antoine Lavoisier. French chemist Antoine Lavoisier was very important. He helped change science from being more qualitative to being more quantitative and factual. He talked about how oxygen works in burning and even gave oxygen and hydrogen their names. He made a complete list of all the elements, which was a step toward the current periodic table. He also came up with a way to name chemicals. People think of him as the father of modern chemistry because his work was so important. Robespierre cared more about expanding his power than about the role of French science, which was a bad thing. Lavoisier was in charge of the Femme Générale, a part of the government that was very disliked. During his time in the Femme Générale, he was questioned about his possible role in adding water to tobacco to make it heavier before selling it and stealing money from the state. He was found guilty, and even though people tried to save his life because he was a scientist, the judge is said to have said that France doesn't need scientists, but needs quick justice. Lavoisier was later exonerated, and his personal effects were brought to his wife, complete with a note that said, "To the widow of Lavoisier who was falsely convicted." Camille Desmoulins. Camille Desmoulins was trained as a lawyer, but it was hard for him to start his own practice in Paris. He became so excited about the coming revolution when King Louis XVI called the Estates General together that he committed the rest of his career and his life to it. People liked the finance minister that the king fired, and Camille was so angry about it that he jumped on a table in a cafe and gave a call to arms against the military forces that were gathering in Paris. Riots quickly spread all over Paris. Camille then put out papers that called for a republican government that would represent the people's will and praised the bloodshed that would come to define the revolution. He was one of the more extreme rebels, and he also called Jean-Pierre Brissot a cheater who had betrayed the revolution's goals in public. In many ways, his ideas were the same as those of Georges Danton, who he worked for at one time. When he saw that the reign of terror was turning into an ordeal of death, he tried to bring balance to the revolutionary tribunal, just like Danton had. He was put on trial with Danton in a court that had more political than criminal overtones, and he wasn't allowed to have a lawyer. The blade killed Camille and Danton. Andre Chenier. Andre Chenier was a poet from another country who lived in France and died 3 days before the end of the Reign of Terror. He was one of the most sad figures of the revolution. In what is now Istanbul, Turkey, he was born to a French father and a Greek mother. He spent a short time in the French military and then turned his attention to writing neoclassical poems. He traveled a lot in Europe and was able to write and study poetry without being interrupted by his family, who backed him in all of his plans. Thoughts from the Enlightenment, like where people fit in the world, were the subject of many of his poems. After the terrible events of 1789, which led to the revolution, Chenier's younger brother wrote a lot of pamphlets and got involved in politics. Despite this, André stayed a moderate who thought that France only needed to set up a new rule of law after the king fell. After that, he wrote satires about politics during the Reign of Terror. In July 1794, Robespierre was in a bad spot, so he directly had him put to death for being against the revolution. Not long after that, Robespierre was caught and put to death. Antoine Quentin Fouquier-Tinville. A lot of people thought that Antoine Quentin Fouquier-Tinville was one of the scariest people in the revolution, especially during the Reign of Terror. As a lawyer, he was the public prosecutor, a job given to him by the Revolutionary Tribunal, but a lot of people thought he did his job in a way that made it look like he was following the law when he was actually killing people who were against the political government. So, he didn't have to prove that the people he sent to the execution were really guilty. Near the end of his career and life, he brought charges against a group of nuns who he said were fanatics against the state and tried to start a rebellion or civil war by housing people who were against the change. He called them criminal killers, and the judge gave them all the right punishment, along with the people they had hidden. As one of the last people he put on trial was Robespierre, who he had earlier backed with all his heart. After Robespierre's death, the Thermidorian reaction began, and Fouquier-Tinville was put on trial with other people who had been on the Revolutionary Tribunal. They were found guilty and put to death in May 1795. Louis-Antoine de Saint-Just. Louis-Antoine de Saint-Just was the public face of the Reign of Terror. Antoine Quentin Fouquier-Tinville was one of the most evil people in the movement. As he worked his way up in the National Convention, he became close with Robespierre. He wrote the first draft of the French Constitution in 1791, which was the first constitution of the Revolution. The second constitution, which was written in 1793, got rid of the moderate changes that had been promised before. When the movement started, de Saint-Just wrote a lot of pamphlets and other things with a moralizing tone about his social and political ideas. He also spoke with great emotion and often moved people to tears by talking about the revolution's ideas and his commitment to them. Around the time he wrote the Constitution in 1793, France was already under martial rule. This rule probably worked well for de Saint-Just because he was a military leader known for being very strict and having a brutal passion for the revolution. He found that Robespierre had lost a lot of power when he got back from the war with Austria in 1794. Even though he knew there was a real chance of bloodshed, he kept giving passionate speeches to the National Convention. Soon after he got back, he was arrested and put to death with Robespierre. Georges Couthon. Maximilien Robespierre, Louis-Antoine de Saint-Just, and Georges Couthon were all important rebel leaders who worked together. His political views were very extreme, and as a member of the National Convention, he called for the king to be put to death. He also worked with Louis de Saint-Just on a group that wrote a new constitution that made the reign of terror legal. He fought very hard for the execution of all enemies of the revolution, and he helped lead the way in killing members of more reasonable groups, like the Girondins. He also pushed for laws that made it easier to kill anyone who opposed the change, which helped keep the reign of terror safe. People rose up against the reign of terror in July 1794. It was called the Thermidorian Reaction. As many as 2% of the French population was arrested for apparently being against the revolution, and 17,000 were put to death by the guillotine. People were fed up with the executions, so they arrested Robespierre, de Saint-Just, Couthon, and other terror leaders. Couthon was put to death at the guillotine with the master he had fought so hard for. He was one of the last people to die at the Grand Razor in France. Jacques Cazotte. Jacques Cazotte was one of the more interesting people who were put to death during the Revolution, and his story shows how far Madame Guillotine's fingers reached. He wasn't a politician or involved in the movement in any other way. Instead, he was an author and translator who wrote books for kids and translated works by Enlightenment thinkers like Voltaire. His writings sometimes had a spiritual feel to them and talked about things like the devil. Around 1775, Cazotte used the ideas of the infamous Illuminati, a group of scientists and Enlightenment thinkers who were mostly misunderstood. His spiritual side was more in line with the group's ideas, though, and he thought he was a prophet. In fact, Jean-François de la Harpe, a writer, said that Cazotte had amazingly predicted even the smallest details of the revolution. Before the revolution, Cazotte joined an obscure group called the Martinists. These people believed in a spiritual return to the Holy Source through a process of illumination, also known as reintegration. He also thought of himself as a monarchist, albeit a mysterious one, and sent letters that were seen as being against the change. In August 1792, he was caught and put to death at the guillotine. People today see the French Revolution as one of the most important events in Western history. It was a time when democratic and Enlightenment ideas quickly gave way to barbarism and mass killing. But it did many good things, like ending the French monarchy and the idea that kings had divine rights. It also showed that people could successfully fight against a government they saw as oppressive.